In its cover story this week, Finweek chats to 4 entrepreneurs about how they raise funds to start their businesses and the various avenues available to them. Joining me on the desk is Chris Bischoff, he's the developer of Stasis, and Sonia Gilder, manager at Pre-Investment Business Center. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. Sonia, let's perhaps start off with you. When we look at, when you are at the IDC and you are dealing with entrepreneurs with their business ideas coming in looking for funding, do you find that they have an understanding and have their finger on the pulse of how much capital they actually require for the venture they're about to take?
Deepa, sometimes they do, which is very heartening for us, but in most instances they don't. I think many entrepreneurs, when they start a business, they tend to sell themselves short on how big they can grow their market, but also then how much funding is required. I think many people don't realize that you need money to make money. And we talk about working capital requirements, and most people sell themselves or cut them short on that.
So one of the things that I find when I start talking to entrepreneurs is often that they don't have a grasp of what of their finances, or of what actually is needed when you run a business, and it's working capital, it's cash flow, what is the income statement, what are their assets. When you look at an entrepreneur, how important is that when you're actually assessing their criteria?
It's extremely important. If they do not know their own cash flow, their cash flow requirements and what they have available, it's very difficult for them to manage the business, firstly. Secondly, they could run into issues when they grow their businesses and run out of cash. And thirdly, it's very difficult for a financier to finance them if they don't have an idea as to what they require. We normally have a saying, specifically in IDC, we finance people, not necessarily businesses.
But that's a fair point then, because what about the needing of a financial manager or FD, somebody who's actually got a grasp of it? I mean, it's easy to go and get these template-driven business plans that you can kind of stick some numbers into, but real understanding of it. If you look at a business or a team that comes to you and they don't have somebody with finance skills, does that black mark against them?
It does not black mark them, but what we normally ask them to do is to undertake to appoint someone to help them through these things, because it's extremely important. I mean, the financial side of a business is so important for the financiers and everyone. What we also suggest for them to do is to use their auditors in the beginning, especially if sometimes they can't they can't find someone in time or things like that, or they can't afford it. And then we normally suggest to them to just use their auditors.
So Chris, one thing that I found quite interesting looking at the makeup for this article, very few people went to banks to go and get money. And look, I think there's a bit of distrust of banking institutions in general, because I think there's an idea out there that banks don't lend and support entrepreneurs. Why didn't you go to a bank for funding?
The big thing with us is that because our business was so new and so niche, we honestly weren't certain if we could actually get kind of banking finance. But there's also a thing with Kickstarter as well, is that it actually gives you direct contact with the audience that you're trying to actually sell your product to. And I mean, that in itself is something that a marketer would dream about. I mean, imagine being able to finance a business with 4,500 people that are actively involved in your project and really want that project to succeed. I mean, you can't buy that sort of support. Well, you obviously can with Kickstarter, but I mean, that sort of thing is like a bank can't actually offer that. A bank can offer the finances, but what crowdsourcing allows us to do is finances as well as the support of the people that are going to be using your end product as well.
Can we maybe talk about how you decided how much money you'll need?
The Kickstarter was quite different for us in the way we did it, and that usually what people do is they actually look at the money and they say, okay, we need $50,000 or $100,000 to actually do our product. And what we did is we looked at this as sort of like, if we were going to start this as a business, how much would we actually need? So we had to see if I'm going to take off a year of work from my company, which I am a managing partner in the company, what would the amount of money be needed to actually make this a viable thing for us to actually do? So, we could have raised $20,000 and been like, well, this is fantastic. I've got enough money to keep me going for the next year on, ramen noodles and water. But I mean, at the end of that year, if I've only sold $20,000 worth of product, it's not a viable thing for me to go and say, well, now this is going to be the next 5, 10, 15 years of my life. So we looked at it not only in terms of how much the game was going to cost to actually continue to produce, but also what would be a viable amount of money that we could go and we could say, if we got $100,000 and we then sold the game and we sold 4 or 5 times the amount of money that we'd actually need to really continue this as a lifestyle business to actually go forward.
Sonia, I mean, one could always argue that for a business that is product orientated, if they were to have advance orders, perhaps that would be a good test of the validity of their idea and whether it has any attraction to the market. Do you look at that as an indicator before you make the final decision to partner or fund a specific project?
Yes, definitely. But bear in mind, we do finance different industries. So in some industries, you won't be able to have that. For a venture capital kind of industry, you might not have contracts in place. For existing businesses and things like that, it is much easier for a financier to say, yes, I believe in the viability of this business if there are contracts in place.
So I'll put you on the spot then here. You've just heard Chris's pitch, and he's gone to a Kickstarter type initiative to get money. Does it worry you that he's gone to them rather than to an organisation like the IDC? And then I guess as a follow-up question, has in 5 minutes chatting to Chris, do you think he's got enough business attributes that you'd be interested in backing him?
Do you have interest in Chris's business by any chance? It's a good question.
Okay, let's start with the first one. No, I'm not worried that he went to a startup for finance, because they are better geared in most instances to validate these kind of things and to have a look at it. That's a venture capital type of industry, and we do have a venture capital industry and business unit in IDC, but it's very difficult to gauge. So for us, it's not an issue if people start off with other financiers. Later on, as soon as he's into it a bit more, and like you mentioned, contracts and things like that, then it's easier for IDC or other bigger financiers to just step up.
Oh, sorry. The issue with the IDC, I find, or I've heard, is that you require so much preparation before you can actually approach the IDC. You need a business plan. You need to know exactly how much money you're going to get, as Mark mentioned. For a company like Chris's company, isn't the barrier to entry a little bit too high at the IDC?
We've had many comments like that, and what we've tried to do in the last 3 years, we started the Pre-Investment Business Centre just under 3 years ago, and we've tried to sort of breach that gap, because what we have found is that people don't necessarily know what kind of business plans they need. So we've now really given a whole list of things of what we require. We've also built a tool on our website where people can go and build business plans and things like that. But we also try and encourage them to come and talk to us. We have an initiative with NYDA and CIFA where we actually help people with our consultants to build business plans.
Okay.
Sorry, Mark. I mean, oftentimes when one reads stories about entrepreneurs, it always seems as if the passion always comes before the need for funding. So the heart goes up first. I mean, did you have that experience? And once your passion had to deal with the RAND signs that you actually needed, did was it a sort of come back to life moment, or had you always been parallel with both?
Well, I mean, Stasis, I've worked on it for 3 years in my spare time, afternoons and weekends, before we even got to a point where we were like, well, it might be a viable product for people to actually go do it. So I mean, essentially, it's a hobby project. It started as a hobby project, very much a passion-based project. I mean, you don't work on something for 3 years and then sort of, kind of put it to the side afterwards, sort of thing. So it was definitely a project that it had a massive foundation laid for it before we even considered actually going and finding external funding for it. And I think that really came through in how we actually managed the fundraising part of the campaign. And I think that sort of, if it was a case of just doing something to make money, it wouldn't have actually worked. I think that people, especially in the crowdfunding industry, respond mostly to passion more than anything else.
Okay, so Sonia ducked my second question, so I'm going to give you the opportunity to respond. Has she done enough to convince you that the IDC would be an organisation to approach if you were to go and look for your next? And I appreciate it's a short-term discussion, but I'm just saying, like, there's this perception out there, trying to do business with the IDC is hard. Would you consider it going forward?
Yeah, to be honest, if Kickstarter hadn't actually worked, we would have gone with some sort of venture capitalist, some sort of angel investing, perhaps even the IDC, if it went that way. The large sort of question that we have to actually ask ourselves is, although now we actually are accountable to a lot of people, we've got 4,500 backers, it might actually be up to about 5,000 with the external funding. It's actually almost an easier burden to bear knowing that I owe somebody $20 instead of knowing that I owe an organization 1.5 million rand. So in that case over there, it's actually, it sort of takes a bit of pressure off of the person who's actually starting a business. I think going to a bank, going to the IDC, going to any sort of angel investor or venture capitalist does have an extra sort of sword of Damocles hanging over your head of, if this doesn't actually work, how am I going to get out of it? Which I think is much easier. But I mean, it's definitely not something that we we discounted outright, but it was a case of let's try the Kickstarter, try crowdfunding. If it doesn't work, then we'll look at the alternatives.
And then Sonia, do you think that the risk has, you've just heard that, and I think this is a concern for entrepreneurs, is it's scary to borrow money from somebody. How do you, has the risk appetite from South African entrepreneurs changed enough that they are actually prepared to take that risk over, let's say, the last 5 years?
I think it has. If you look at from 2008, we've really had depressed situations, and yes, people have actually come for more funding, because I think they've realised that you have to weigh the scary part of having the finance with. You've got to what's that word?
Reward, risk and reward.
Risk and reward, but also you've got to debt and equity. You know, you have to gear your company properly.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, let me throw another question at you, Sonia. I mean, when we look at entrepreneurs that the IDC works with, I would assume that when you're looking at startups, you use a somewhat different framework than those that are looking to expand looking for finances to expand their businesses. You know, talk us a little bit about the key differentiators that you apply, or how you look at them before you advance funding.
Sure. If you look at our processes and things like that, it's not necessarily different, but we have, on every single deal that we do, we have due diligence teams. My team is involved before they go on due diligence, so my team would work with the entrepreneurs, and we'll see who needs more assistance and who won't. So we will assist the startups a bit better to say, look, let's help you a bit with your business plan. Let's give you a consultant if not necessary. We do prefer that people do their own business plans. It is better, they take ownership, they know what's going on, and we need them to know what's going on.
Can you tell us what you look for in a business plan? What are the key indicators of a good business plan?
Well, a good business plan speaks to about, well, at least 4 things. Firstly, your market, where you are currently, how you're going to get there. Secondly, your technical side. So what do you have? What kind of equipment do you have? If you're manufacturing, what kind of other systems do you have? Thirdly, financial, very important. Where are you? Where are you going? How are you going to do that? And then management. We basically finance individuals or people.